My name is Harold Whitfield, and the night my wife thought I was too sedated to hear her, she made a mistake that cost her everything she'd spent 4 years building. It was 6:52 on a Wednesday evening at Miami Valley Hospital in Dayton, Ohio, and the machine beside my bed was ticking off my heartbeat in soft green light. Dr. Elena Cho had left the room 11 minutes earlier, and the door hadn't fully latched behind her. I remember that detail because it mattered more than anything else that happened that week. A door that doesn't close all the way can save a man's life, or end a marriage. Sometimes both. The scan showed a mass pressing against my liver, she'd said, standing at the foot of the bed with her tablet held against her chest like a shield. There's also significant inflammation, possibly an abscess, possibly something worse. We won't know until the biopsy. My wife, Renata, had reached for my hand before the doctor even finished the sentence. And I remember thinking, in that first foolish moment, how lucky I was to have married a woman who reached for me before she reached for anything else. I found out 4 days later exactly what she reached for first. "Are you saying this could be terminal?" Renata had asked, and her voice had the practiced steadiness of someone reading off a card. Dr. Cho paused the way doctors pause when they're deciding how much truth a room can hold. "It's possible," she said. "If the mass is malignant and has already spread, we could be talking about a short timeline. Weeks, possibly less, depending on what the biopsy shows." "Weeks," Renata repeated. "Possibly less." After the doctor left, my wife sat in the vinyl chair beside my bed and performed grief for exactly as long as it took the nurse to walk past the door and disappear down the hall. Then she leaned in, smoothed the blanket over my chest with a tenderness that looked, from the outside, like devotion, and pressed her lips near my ear. Finally, she whispered, "A few more weeks and it's all mine." I didn't move. I didn't open my eyes. The morphine drip had made my body heavy enough that lying still wasn't even a performance. It was simply what my body was already doing. But my mind, for the first time in 4 years, was wide awake. My stepdaughter Brielle was standing by the window with her phone in her hand, the blue light of the screen washing out her face. She didn't look up from it when she spoke. "I already texted Connor about the workshop," she said. "He says it's worth at least 90, maybe more, with the tools included." The workshop. My workshop. The converted barn behind the house where I'd spent 30 years of Saturday mornings, restoring a 1968 Ford Mustang fastback with my first wife, Colleen, standing beside me, handing me wrenches and arguing with me about paint colors, until we both laughed too hard to keep working. Colleen had died 9 years before that hospital room, after 34 years of marriage, and the Mustang was the only thing I owned that still smelled like her. Engine grease and the vanilla hand cream she used to keep in the glove box, faded now but never quite gone. Brielle didn't know the Mustang wasn't for sale. Brielle didn't know it had never been for sale. What she knew was its estimated value, down to the dollar, because she'd apparently already had it appraised. Renata straightened up and smoothed her skirt, businesslike now that the tender moment had served its purpose. "We shouldn't talk about this here," she said, glancing at the door. "But yes, we'll need to move quickly once." She stopped herself, chose a gentler word, "once things are settled." They stepped out into the hallway, but the door swung only halfway shut, catching on the little rubber stopper the hospital used to keep rooms from locking. I could hear every word. "I already called a realtor friend," Renata was saying, her voice pitched low but not low enough. "Not yet, obviously. That would look terrible. We wait until after the funeral, then list it in spring when the market's better." "What about the company?" Brielle asked. "Does it just come to you?" "Most of it, yes. There's some employee stock thing Harold set up years ago, some of it's tied up. But the controlling share is mine once the will clears probate. I'll talk to Warren about restructuring it. Sell off the equipment division, keep the contracts." "And Desmond?" Brielle asked. "Does he get anything?" A pause. "He gets a nice card at the funeral," Renata said, and I heard something in her voice I'd never let myself hear before. Not sorrow, not even coldness, but boredom. The bored efficiency of a woman doing inventory. I was 67 years old. I had built Whitfield grounds in stone out of a rusted-out Chevy flatbed, and $11,000 I'd borrowed against my father's tools. By the time I handed off daily operations, we held contracts across 3 counties, corporate campuses, senior living facilities, 2 universities. I wasn't a rich man by the standards of rich men, but I owned my house outright. I had no debt, and I still held 68% of the company I'd built with my own hands, and Colleen's stubborn faith in me. Renata knew all of that before she married me. We'd met at a Rotary Club fundraiser 3 years after Colleen died, back when I was still driving to the cemetery every Sunday and sitting in my truck outside my own house some nights because I couldn't stand the quiet of walking in alone. Renata filled the silence. She remembered how I took my coffee. She laughed at stories I'd told 100 times to people who'd stopped listening. She told me she'd always admired men who built things with their hands instead of just managing other people's money. What I didn't understand back then, what I refused to understand, because understanding it would have meant admitting how badly I needed someone, anyone, to fill that house, was that she'd studied me the way a contractor studies a building before deciding what's load-bearing and what can be knocked out without the whole thing collapsing. There'd been signs. There are always signs. We just give them softer names because the real name is inconvenient. She'd asked early and often whether I'd updated my beneficiaries. She'd suggested selling the rental duplex on Salem Avenue so we could actually enjoy the money instead of managing it. She'd rolled her eyes at the Christmas bonuses I gave the crew who'd been with me 15, 20 years. Brielle called me dad exactly twice a year, my birthday and whenever her car needed a repair I ended up paying for, and vanished for months at a stretch otherwise. Lying in that hospital bed with the door cracked open and my wife's whisper still warm against my ear, I finally heard what all those small moments had been building toward. Not a marriage. An acquisition. A little after 8 that night, a familiar shape filled the doorway, flannel jacket, work boots still carrying a faint ring of mulch dust, and a gas station coffee in each hand. Desmond Carter had run my crews for 26 years. Foreman was the word on his paycheck, but it never came close to covering what he actually was to me. He'd slept in a folding chair outside Colleen's hospital room the week before she died, because he didn't think I should sit with that alone. He'd mowed my lawn every Thursday that whole first summer after and never once sent a bill. "You look like hell, Whitfield," he said, setting one coffee on the tray table. "I always know just what to say, don't I?" I managed. "It's why you keep me around," he said, and dropped into the chair Renata had just vacated. Then he saw my face, really saw it, and set his own cup down slow. "What happened?" I told him. "The scan, the doctor's careful phrasing. And then..." In a voice I barely recognized as mine, I told him what Renata had whispered, and what Brielle had said about the Mustang, and about the realtor friend, and about the nice card at the funeral. Desmond didn't say anything for a long moment. He turned his coffee cup in a slow circle on the tray table, the way he used to turn a wrench when he was deciding how bad a repair was actually going to be. Finally, he said, "She's already spending you." "Maybe I've already been spent for a while and just didn't notice," I said. "What exactly did the doctor say?" Desmond asked. Not what Renata heard. "What did she say?" I repeated it as carefully as I could. "A mass. Inflammation, possibly an abscess. No confirmed diagnosis. A biopsy still needed before anyone could say anything with certainty." Desmond leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "My cousin Ray had something like that 2 winters back," he said. "Pancreas. Not liver, but close enough. First scan had the whole family planning a funeral. Turned out to be a walled-off infection from an old gallbladder surgery gone bad. Scared him half to death for nothing." "You think that's what this is?" I asked. "I think you don't let anybody bury you before the lab results come back," he said. Then his jaw tightened in a way I'd only seen once before, the day a supplier tried to shortchange us on a load of pavers. Renata already told the charge nurse she wanted to talk about comfort-focused care, called it sparing you unnecessary suffering. That was the moment something in my chest shifted. Not hope exactly. More like a door creaking open in a room I'd have sworn had no other way out. I reached over and gripped his wrist, harder than I meant to. "Help me find out the truth," I said. "And I'll make sure you never have to swing a shovel again as long as you live." He looked almost insulted. "I'll help because you're my friend, you old fool." We can argue about money after you're not dying. Then he pulled out his phone. I know a specialist at Kettering who saw Ray. I'll call her tonight. He walked to the window for better signal, and I watched him dial, and I watched the clock on the wall tick past 8:15, and I thought about how 3 hours earlier I had believed I might have weeks left to live, and how now, for the first time, I understood that the real question wasn't how much time I had. It was whether my wife had been planning to bury me, or whether she'd simply shown me who she was a little sooner than she meant to. Desmond hung up and came back to the bed. Dr. Marsh can pull your scans tonight if we get them to her, he said. She'll need the imaging file, the lab work, everything. How do we get that without Renata finding out? I asked. He gave me a look that made me feel, not for the first time that week, like an old fool. You're the patient, Harold. Nobody but you has to sign anything. It was such a plain answer that I felt a flush of embarrassment climb up my neck. For 4 years, Renata had trained me, one small decision at a time, to run everything through her first. Which restaurant, which vacation, which checks got signed without a second look, which old friends were too much for me lately. Somewhere in there I'd confused avoiding a fight with keeping the peace. I pressed the call button. A nurse named Priya came in a few minutes later, badge reel shaped like a little enamel sunflower. I need my full file sent to another physician for a second opinion, I told her. Of course, she said. I'll need you to sign a release. She glanced between me and Desmond. Just you, unless you want someone else authorized. Just me, I said. She left to get the paperwork, and Desmond allowed himself the smallest smile. One step, he said. Small ones still get you out the door eventually. The door opened before he could say anything else. Renata came in first, a canvas tote over one shoulder and an expression of finely tuned concern arranged on her face. Brielle trailed behind, eyes on her phone. What's going on in here? Renata asked, looking between us. Desmond didn't miss a beat, telling him the gutter on the east side of the barn's pulling away from the fascia board, needs fixing before it snows. I didn't realize dying paused home maintenance, I said, and had to look at the ceiling so she wouldn't catch me almost smiling. Renata set the tote bag on the chair. Well, thank you for stopping by, Desmond, but Harold really needs his rest. I'll decide when I need rest, I said. She looked at me the way you'd look at a lamp that had suddenly started talking. Then the concern smoothed back over her face like a bedsheet being tucked in. Of course, honey. I only want what's best for you. Priya came back with the clipboard, and Renata's eyes went straight to it. What's that? A records release, Priya said. For what? Renata asked, already reaching for it before I could answer. A second opinion, I said, taking the clipboard out of easy reach. Something moved across Renata's face too fast to name, there and gone, like a fish turning under dark water. Harold, she said gently, do you really want to put yourself through more scans, more waiting? The doctor was fairly clear about what we're facing. She was clear about what we don't yet know, I said. I signed the form. My hand shook, and I let her think it was weakness. It wasn't. It was the first real decision I'd made in years that I hadn't run past her first, and my whole body knew it. That's where I'll pick back up. Renata's face when she realized I'd stopped playing the part she'd already written for me, the recordings Desmond and I started building without either of them knowing, and the moment my lawyer, Miriam Voss, told me 3 words that changed everything. Are you safe? Renata sat down in the chair and pulled it close, lowering her voice like she was doing me a kindness. You need to be careful who you let influence you right now, she said. People change when they think money's on the table. So I've noticed, I said. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. I'm tired. I closed my eyes and let her sit there another 10 minutes watching me, waiting to see if I'd explain myself. I didn't give her the satisfaction. The next morning she arrived with coffee, a laptop, and a manila folder thick enough to mean business. For anyone walking past the room, she looked like devotion itself. Fixing my pillows, murmuring sweetly to the nurses, posting a photo of our clasped hands to Facebook with a caption asking for prayers. Then she opened the folder on my tray table. Just some routine paperwork, she said, so I can keep things running smoothly if you get too weak to manage them yourself. The first page was a durable power of attorney. The second expanded her access to our joint accounts and the company's operating account. The third authorized her to speak with Whitfield Grounds and Stones Board on my behalf. A board that, as far as I knew, had never once heard her name mentioned in a business context. Routine, I repeated, and let the papers sit on the blanket without touching a pen. I'll have Miriam look these over first. Miriam's been out of the loop on our life for years, Renata said, a little too quickly. You don't need to drag your lawyer into something this simple. She's been my attorney for 18 years, I said. She's not exactly out of the loop, Brielle, sprawled on the window bench scrolling through what I now assumed was a used Mustang parts listing, spoke without looking up. Mom's just trying to help you, Harold. Don't make this difficult. Then Miriam won't mind reading 3 pages. I said. Renata's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed honey smooth. You're not thinking clearly. The stress, the medication, that sentence frightened me more than the mass on the scan had. Not because there was any truth in it, but because I understood in one cold instant how useful a sentence like that could become if she said it often enough to enough people, before I had a chance to prove otherwise. When she went down to the cafeteria for lunch, I asked Priya to note in my chart that I wanted to retain full authority over my own medical decisions. Then I shut myself in the bathroom, ran the sink so Brielle wouldn't hear through the wall, and called Miriam Voss. Harold, she said, I need you to slow down and tell me everything, in order. I told her about the whisper, about the Mustang being appraised before I'd taken a single dose of chemo I didn't even know yet whether I'd need, about the folder of authorizations. Her voice, usually warm and unhurried, sharpened line by line as I talked. Do not sign 1 page of that folder, she said. Not 1 page, I hadn't planned to. I need your treating physicians to document, in writing, that you're alert, oriented, and fully capable of making your own decisions. I also want copies of every power of attorney or account authorization she's gotten from you in the last 4 years. I'm revoking anything that gives her reach she shouldn't have. Can you come here? I asked. I'm already getting my coat, she said. And then, after a pause that told me she'd heard something in my voice I hadn't meant to let through, Harold, are you safe in that house? I looked at the bathroom door, locked against my own wife. I honestly don't know anymore, I said. That afternoon, Dr. Rebecca Marsh called from Kettering. She'd reviewed every image Desmond had ferried across town the night before. There is definitely an abnormal mass near the liver margin, she said, but I don't agree that imaging alone supports a terminal diagnosis at this stage. It's very possibly a walled-off infected collection, not a tumor. We need tissue before anyone uses the word terminal in front of you again. So I might not be dying, I said, and my voice cracked in a way I wasn't proud of. You might not be, she said, but the infection is serious, and it needs to be drained and cultured immediately, along with a biopsy to rule out malignancy for certain. I'd recommend doing it today if your team here agrees. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles ached. Renata had wanted me discharged into hospice-style comfort care without any of that. Today, I said. Let's do it today. Renata was furious when she found out, though she wrapped the fury in the costume of fear. You're putting yourself through unnecessary suffering, she said, standing at the foot of my bed as the transport team prepped to wheel me down. And if the answer changes nothing, I asked, why does it matter to you whether I know it? She didn't have an answer for that. She just watched them wheel me away with an expression I couldn't quite read. And for the first time in 4 years, I didn't try to read it for her benefit. I let it be her problem. The procedure happened that evening. 2 days later, Dr. Cho came into my room with Priya and shut the door firmly behind her. Renata had gone home to shower. Brielle was down getting coffee with a friend who'd apparently driven 40 minutes just to see the Mustang in person. The biopsy came back clean, Dr. Cho said. No malignant cells. I stared at her, waiting for the rest of the sentence to turn into bad news the way sentences in that building always seem to. It's a large infected fluid collection, she continued, related to an old, undiagnosed episode of pancreatitis. Severe, genuinely dangerous, left untreated. But treatable. Drainage, IV antibiotics, 6 to 8 weeks of recovery, and you should make a full return to your normal life. I'm not dying, I said. Not from this. Not from this, she confirmed. You have a hard recovery ahead of you. But no, Harold, you are not terminal. I put both hands over my face and let myself feel it. Relief crashing through me so hard it actually hurt, like blood rushing back into a numb limb. And then, right behind it, close enough that the two feelings tangled together, I thought of Renata's whisper. Brielle pricing the Mustang. The folder of authorization sitting untouched in my nightstand drawer like a loaded gun. Someone had politely handed me for safekeeping. Desmond arrived 20 minutes later, and when I told him, he pulled me into a hug, careful of the IV lines, his shoulders shaking with something between a laugh and a sob. So we tell them tonight, he said, pulling back, grinning like a man who'd been handed back his best friend. God knows I wanted to. I wanted to watch Renata's face crumble in real time. But Miriam, standing by the window with her briefcase already open on the sill, shook her head. If you tell her now, she said, she'll say she was overwhelmed. Scared, that grief made her say things she didn't mean. She'll deny the worst of it. And we still don't know everything she's already set in motion behind your back. I don't want to spend my second chance playing games, I told her. This isn't a game, Miriam said. It's protection. For you and for everything you spent 40 years building. I sat with that a long time. Then I asked Dr. Cho to tell Renata only that my condition had stabilized and that further test results were still pending. Let her keep planning her spring listing a little longer. Let her keep believing she'd won. After everyone else left, Desmond lingered by the bed. So what now, he asked. I looked toward the hallway, where my wife would walk back through that door in an hour or two and perform another scene of devoted concern for an audience of exactly no one who mattered. Now we let them plan the funeral, I said. I want to hear what they say when they think I'll never be able to answer back. I was discharged 4 days later. Not fully healed, but stable enough to continue IV antibiotics at home, with Dr. Marsh coordinating everything quietly with my Dayton team, so nothing crossed Renata's desk without my say-so first. Renata hugged half the nursing staff on the way out. You have no idea what this means to us, she told Priya, dabbing at eyes that stayed suspiciously dry. The October air was sharp and smelled like wet leaves as Desmond helped me into his truck. You sure about this? He asked quietly, glancing toward Renata's SUV, where Brielle was already complaining loudly about missing a hair appointment because of the drive home. No, I said honestly. But I'm sure about getting there. My own house didn't feel like mine anymore when we pulled into the driveway. The old sugar maple Colleen and I had planted 22 years earlier still stood by the walk, half its leaves gone red gold and scattered across the lawn. The porch swing she'd loved still creaked in the wind exactly the way it always had. Nothing had changed except me, or maybe I was only now seeing what had been there all along. Renata went in ahead of us. I'll get the guest room ready for you, she called back over her shoulder. The guest room, I said. Why would I sleep in the guest room? You'll rest better downstairs while you're healing, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. You need uninterrupted sleep. The master bedroom was upstairs. So you'll be sleeping upstairs, I said. Alone, apparently, in my own house, without so much as a conversation about it. I'll sleep in my own room, I told her, and she offered up a tight little smile and said, whatever makes you comfortable, in a tone that suggested it was anything but what she wanted. The home health nurse, a brisk, kind woman named Denise, came by that evening to check my IV line and my vitals. You're going to feel weak for a while, she warned. That's just how it works. Nothing new there, I told her, and she laughed, said she liked patients with a sense of humor left in them. After Denise left, Renata hovered while I took my evening pills. You should rest, she said. I've been resting for 4 days straight. You need to conserve your strength. For what? I asked. She didn't answer. She only tucked the blanket around my legs like I was 98 instead of 67, and to anyone watching from the doorway, she would have looked like a devoted wife nursing her dying husband back to health. I knew better now. I'd heard the whisper. I'd heard the appraisal. I knew exactly what kind of nursing this was. I woke the next morning before sunrise, the way I had every working day of my adult life, and made my way downstairs slowly with my cane so the floorboards wouldn't give me away. That's when I heard the voices coming from the dining room. Renata and Brielle, neither one aware I was standing at the bottom of the stairs. The realtor can come look at the barn conversion next month, Brielle was saying. Once things settle. Not yet, Renata said. People talk. We need everyone feeling sorry for us a little longer first. And the Mustang, Brielle asked. Connor's still interested. Says he'll pay cash, no negotiating. Not yet either, Renata said. Let's not look eager. I stood frozen on the third step from the bottom, one hand white-knuckled on the railing, and thought about the summer Colleen and I had spent stripping 40 years of rust off that fastback's frame, arguing about whether the interior should be black or ox blood, eating gas station sandwiches off the workbench because neither of us wanted to stop for dinner. After she died, I hadn't been able to start the engine for almost 2 years. And here was my stepdaughter, negotiating its sale in whispers over breakfast, weeks before I was even supposed to be dead. I climbed the stairs back up before either of them saw me, and for the first time in my own life, my own staircase felt like enemy territory. That afternoon Desmond showed up, carrying a rake over one shoulder, officially to clear the yard, unofficially to check on me. Renata met him at the door with a smile, stretched thin. "Oh, Desmond! We really don't need yard work right now. Leaves don't usually wait around for funerals," he said, and went to work anyway. An hour later he knocked on my bedroom door and asked, loudly enough for anyone downstairs to hear, whether he could check the drainage behind the barn. Renata called back that it was fine, go ahead, with no idea we'd used that exact excuse dozens of times over the years whenever we needed 5 private minutes. I stepped out onto the back deck slow and careful, and Desmond crouched over a drain pipe he had no real interest in. Without looking up, he said quietly, "Miriam's been busy." "How busy?" I asked. "She found 3 separate things Renata's already tried. Called the bank asking what happens to joint accounts if a spouse dies. Called the insurance broker asking who becomes the authorized contact if something happens to you. And she asked your accountant, Warren, for a full business valuation report. Told him it was for estate planning, in case, quote, the worst happens." I gripped my cane hard enough to feel it in my shoulder. "She's been building the whole story in advance," I said. Desmond finally looked up at me. "She hasn't actually gotten anything, though. Not one account, not one signature. Every door she's tried, Miriam's already locked from the other side." That night felt like the first real breath I'd taken in a week. 2 evenings later, Miriam came by carrying a grocery bag, so it would look, from the street, like nothing more than a friend dropping off dinner. Renata greeted her politely enough at the door. "Harold's been wanting company," she said. "I've been wanting your chicken and rice recipe for years," Miriam answered, and it was, without question, the most convincing lie I'd heard all week. After dinner, while Renata went upstairs to shower, Miriam spread 3 folders across my desk in the little office off the kitchen. "Here's exactly where we stand," she said. "Every physician who's seen you has documented, in writing, that you're mentally competent and capable of making your own decisions. I've revoked every financial authorization she ever talked you into. She never actually had broad power of attorney. You'd only ever signed limited things. And thank God for that. Lucky," I said. "Not lucky," she said, closing the folder. "Careful. Even when you couldn't say why." Then she opened a second folder and slid it toward me. "I'd also recommend, strongly, moving the company into an irrevocable trust before this divorce becomes what it's clearly going to become." The word landed harder than I expected. Divorce. I hadn't let myself say it out loud yet, not even inside my own head. "You don't have to decide tonight," Miriam said gently. "I think I already have," I told her. Over the next several days, my life settled into an uneasy rhythm. Morning medication, physical therapy, Denise's visits, and long stretches of pretending to nap while Renata wandered the house on the phone, believing she was unobserved. I learned more in those fake naps than I'd learned in 4 years of actual marriage. She wasn't cruel in any dramatic way. She was practical, clinical, the way a person is practical about a roof that needs replacing, necessary, inconvenient, best handled efficiently, and without too much sentiment attached. That, somehow, was worse than cruelty would have been. One afternoon, Brielle brought 2 friends over to see the Mustang. I stood just out of sight in the mudroom doorway and listened to a young man whistle low over the fastback's lines. "Your stepdad kept this thing showroom clean," he said. He worshipped it, Brielle said, laughing a little. Think he'd want you selling it? The friend asked. He won't care, Brielle said. He won't even know. 3 words. He won't even know. They followed me around the house for the rest of the day like a smell I couldn't wash off. Maybe she was right in the version of events she'd already written in her head. Dead men don't care about anything. But I wasn't dead. Not even close. And every day that passed, I understood a little more clearly that I was done, letting her write the ending before I'd even finished living the story. A few days after that, Desmond came by with a small terracotta pot and a rosemary plant, setting it by the back steps like he was doing nothing more than a bit of casual landscaping. Renata barely glanced at it. I noticed immediately, rosemary by the back steps was the signal we'd used for 30 years whenever a job was ready to move to its next phase. Ever since the 2 of us had planted a whole row of it along a client's driveway. The same week we closed our very first major contract, he loaded his tools back into his truck, glanced once toward the kitchen window, where Renata stood with her phone against her ear, and tipped his cap at me, not quite a smile, just enough to say we're getting close. That night, rain tapping soft against the bedroom windows, Renata climbed into bed beside me for the first time since I'd come home from the hospital. She rested her head against my shoulder in a way that would have undone me completely 4 years earlier. I've been thinking, she said quietly. We should have everyone over this weekend. For what? I asked. So people can see you, see how well you're doing, just in case, just in case. I lay in the dark turning those 3 words over and over, understanding exactly what she meant by them. She wanted witnesses, a final, curated memory of a devoted couple, gathered and ready before whatever came next. That sounds like a wonderful idea, I said. She kissed my cheek, satisfied. I knew you'd understand, she murmured, and within minutes her breathing settled into sleep beside me. I lay awake a long time, listening to the old clock in the hallway strike midnight, one slow chime after another. I wasn't counting down to my own funeral anymore. I was counting down to the day the truth was finally going to walk through my front door in front of every single person Renata had ever tried to perform for. That's where it picks up next. The morning of the gathering, the papers Miriam raced to get notarized before noon. Renata's toast in front of 30 guests standing between her and the truth. And the moment Desmond pressed play on a recording that ended everything she thought she'd already won, by Sunday morning, the whole plan nearly came apart before it even started. Miriam arrived at the house at 8 sharp, carrying a leather folio and 2 paper cups of coffee, slipping in through the side door, so Renata wouldn't spot her from the upstairs window. Desmond was already in the kitchen, pretending to fuss with a loose cabinet hinge that had never once bothered him in 20 years of coming through that door. This still needs a notary signature, Miriam said, laying the final trust document flat on the counter. And the bank hasn't confirmed the new signing authority yet. How long? I asked. Could be an hour. Could be Monday. Monday's too late, Desmond said, glancing at the ceiling, where we could hear Renata moving around upstairs. Getting dressed for what she'd taken to calling my little celebration, Miriam lowered her voice. Harold, we can push this back a week if we need to. Your blood pressure was high at your last check. I know, and once you sign this, there's no putting the marriage back the way it was. I looked down at the papers a long moment. That wasn't the part that scared me. What scared me was something closer to shame. The idea that ending even a bad marriage meant admitting, twice over, that I'd trusted the wrong person, and then stayed long enough for her to believe she could manage me like a line item. You don't have to humiliate her, Desmond said quietly. Just make sure she can't tell her version of this story after you're gone. I'm not going anywhere, I said. I know that, he said. She doesn't. That's the whole point. At 9:30, a mobile notary named Carol Jennings pulled into the driveway in a gray sedan, introduced by Miriam to anyone listening as an old client dropping off paperwork. We signed everything at the kitchen table, while Renata supervised the caterers setting up trays of sandwiches in the dining room, 30 feet away and completely unaware. My hand shook badly enough that Carol paused halfway through. Would you like a minute, Mr. Whitfield? She asked. I'm fine, I told her. Can you explain to me, in your own words, what you're signing today? She asked, per her own protocol. I explained the employee ownership restructuring. Desmond's 12% stake earned over 2.5 decades of loyalty. Nobody else in that house had ever shown me the irrevocable trust and the removal of Renata from any authority over the company whatsoever. Carol nodded, satisfied, and stamped the last page. At 10:04, Miriam's phone buzzed. She read the message and looked up at me. "Banks confirmed," she said. Desmond let out a breath I hadn't realized he'd been holding either. For the first time all morning, so did I. By noon, cars lined both sides of the street. Renata had gone all out, white lilies on every surface, our wedding photos arranged on the mantel, a slideshow playing silently on the television that stitched together 4 years of vacations and holiday dinners, every frame full of Renata and me smiling for a camera. Colleen wasn't in a single picture. Neither was the year I'd built the company from a rusted flatbed truck. 40 years of my life had been quietly edited down to the 4 years Renata had occupied. Pastor Michael Reyes came with his wife. My neighbor Gerald Kopecki, a retired Dayton police sergeant who'd lived next door for 2 decades and never missed a chance to needle me about my Bengals loyalty, showed up in his good sweater. A dozen of my longest tenured crew members came, including men who'd worked beside me since the early 90s. Brielle arrived late, dressed in black, despite the fact that I was, at that moment, very much alive and standing in my own living room. Her boyfriend Connor trailed her out to the barn, and through the open door I heard her whisper, "Don't touch anything yet. It's basically already mine." Gerald, standing near the barn door with a plate of sandwiches, heard it too. He looked at Brielle, then at me, and said nothing. But I saw him file it away, the way old cops file everything away, for later, around 1:30, Renata tapped a spoon against her wine glass, and the room quieted. She stood beside our largest wedding photo, one hand pressed to her chest. In a gesture I'd seen her practice in the bathroom mirror more than once over the years without ever understanding what she was practicing for. "Thank you all for being here today," she began. "Harold wanted the people he loves around him while he still has the strength to enjoy it." I had never said that, not once, to anyone. "These last 2 weeks have taught me how fragile life really is," she continued, dabbing carefully at eyes that produced no actual tears. "Harold gave me a home, a family, a future I never thought I deserved. He's always said he wanted this house, this life, to stay exactly as we built it together." Miriam, standing near the back wall with her arms folded, kept her face perfectly neutral. Gerald's eyebrows crept up half an inch. "And he trusted Brielle to help carry his legacy forward," Renata added. And Brielle actually managed to lower her eyes like a grieving daughter for the cameras that weren't there. "I'm sure Harold would want the company to stay with family." Renata finished. That was the line, not the grief, not the performance. That single sentence, delivered in front of 30 witnesses, was Renata quietly laying claim to Whitfield grounds in stone in front of the exact audience she needed to believe her. I pushed myself up out of my chair. Desmond moved to help me, and I waved him off. I wanted to stand on my own 2 feet for this. The room went quiet as I made my way forward with my cane. Renata's face lit with something that almost looked like relief. "Honey, you don't need to say anything," she said. "Yes," I said. "I do." I faced the room. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "Renata invited you here today to say goodbye to me." A few people shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other. "Before anyone does that," I said, "I need you to hear something I heard first." Desmond lifted a small speaker off the bookshelf where he'd set it that morning and pressed play. Renata's voice filled the living room, tinny but unmistakable, finally. "A few more weeks, and it's all mine." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed, it seemed. Then Brielle's voice, from the second recording Desmond had quietly captured on his phone from the hallway outside my room that first night. "I already texted Connor about the workshop. He says 90, maybe more with the tools." A third clip followed. Renata and Brielle at the dining table, discussing realtors, the spring listing, keeping the funeral small to save money. Desmond stopped the recording, and the silence that followed pressed against the walls of my own living room like weight. Renata recovered first, her voice sharp. "This is disgusting. You recorded private conversations without my knowledge." "I recorded conversations I happened to be lying in the middle of," I said, and Desmond kept what he heard said in front of him. Neither of those things is illegal, Renata. I checked. You were drugged, confused. You don't even know what you're saying right now. Miriam stepped forward. Harold has been evaluated by 2 independent physicians this month, both of whom confirmed, in writing, that he is fully competent and capable of making his own decisions. Renata turned on Desmond. He put you up to this. He's wanted your money for years. Calvin Ortiz, one of my longest-serving foremen, spoke up from near the fireplace. Then why'd you ask Warren for a full business valuation last Tuesday, Renata? Every face in the room turned toward her. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Pastor Reyes folded his hands. You invited us here to celebrate Harold, he said quietly. Let the man finish speaking. Brielle pushed forward through the crowd, furious now. You told me the workshop would be mine someday. You said we'd work on it together. I said, someday we might, I told her. That's not a promise. That's a maybe. It's the same thing, she snapped. No, I said. It really isn't. Her face twisted, and what came out next came out fast, meant to wound. You're not even my real father. The room went still in a different way. That sentence should have cut deeper than it did. Instead, mostly, it just left me tired. No, I said, but I tried very hard to be one anyway. She looked away, and for the first time in years I saw something on her face that might have been shame. Though it didn't last long enough to be sure, Renata stepped toward me, voice dropping, trying one more angle. You're punishing us because we were scared. Harold, scared of losing you. You weren't scared of losing me, I said. You were scared of losing the version of me that was already dying on your timeline. That's a different fear entirely. Her eyes filled with tears. But I'd watched her produce tears on command too many times over 4 years to trust a single one of them now. This whole performance, she said, while you're supposedly dying. I gripped my cane and straightened as much as my back would allow. You're right about one thing, I told her. She waited, some last flicker of hope crossing her face. There isn't going to be a funeral, I said. I'm not dying. Not this year, and not on your schedule. I told the room everything then. The infected fluid collection, the drainage, the antibiotics, the clean biopsy. Renata's face drained pale in front of 30 witnesses. Brielle stared at me like I'd personally betrayed her by staying alive. You're not dying, Brielle said, and it wasn't relief on her face. It was something closer to panic. Renata looked toward Miriam, then back at me. What did you do with everything? She asked, voice low and cold now, all pretense gone. Nothing you didn't hand me every reason to do, I said. She stood in the middle of my living room. One hand pressed against the back of a dining chair, like the floor had shifted under her feet. Maybe it had. For the first time since I'd met her at that Rotary fundraiser 8 years earlier, she had no rehearsed expression left to reach for. No soft smile, no gentle hand on my arm, just fear, plain and unguarded. What did you do? She asked again. I looked at Miriam and she gave a small nod, so I told them plainly. The company wasn't passing to Renata. Most of it was being transferred to the employees and foremen who'd actually built it alongside me. Desmond receiving the ownership stake he'd earned 100 times over across 26 years. Everything else had gone into an irrevocable trust, placed beyond the reach of anyone who hadn't helped build it. And the workshop? Brielle asked, arms crossed. The Mustang? It's going to auction, I said, her head snapped up. You can't. You knew I wanted it. I knew you wanted the money it would bring, I said. That became very clear. A few guests looked down to hide smiles they knew better than to let show. The proceeds fund a scholarship, I continued, for young people learning trades, landscaping, mechanics, welding, kids who can't afford the training otherwise. It'll carry Colleen's name. Renata stepped closer, her voice cracking for what might have been the first genuinely unrehearsed moment of the entire afternoon. What about the house? You'll get exactly what the law and our prenuptial agreement entitle you to, I said. No less. And no more, I added when she opened her mouth to argue. That was the moment she finally understood the shape of what had happened. I hadn't hidden money. I hadn't done anything a court would ever need to unwind. I'd simply, quietly, stopped rewarding her, and there is no lawyer alive who can argue a man back into doing that. She looked around the room, waiting for someone, anyone, to step in on her behalf. Gerald studied the carpet. Pastor Reyes kept his hands folded and his eyes down. Calvin stood beside two foremen with his arms crossed, saying nothing at all. Nobody moved to defend her, and that silence seemed to land harder than anything I'd said all afternoon. She picked up her purse. "Come on, Brielle," she said. Brielle didn't move at first. "What about my things?" she asked. "We're leaving," Renata said again, sharper. They walked out together, and the front door slammed hard enough to rattle Colleen's framed photograph on the side table. Desmond looked at it, straightened it with two fingers, and said, "Loose hinge," and something like a laugh moved through the room. The first honest sound anyone had made in an hour. The months that followed weren't clean, and they weren't especially satisfying, whatever the movies promise you. Renata hired a divorce attorney within 48 hours. She told mutual friends I'd become paranoid and unstable since the hospital stay. She pushed for a second competency evaluation, questioning whether I'd truly understood what I signed that Sunday morning. So I sat through more interviews. "What day is it, Mr. Whitfield? Who is the president? Can you walk me through your major assets?" I wanted more than once to tell them I understood the consequences of divorce a great deal better than I'd ever understood the consequences of that particular marriage. But I kept that to myself and answered every question straight. My doctors confirmed my competence in writing. Carol Jennings provided her notarization notes. Miriam had documented every decision, every signature, every date, with the kind of precision that made Renata's version of events increasingly hard for anyone to believe. The recordings weren't proof of a crime. They didn't need to be. They were simply proof that the devoted wife on the witness stand and the woman whispering "it's all mine" over her husband's hospital bed could not both be telling the truth. Still, the process wore me down some nights. I sat at the kitchen table more than once, surrounded by legal envelopes, my antibiotic pump humming quietly beside my chair, and told Miriam over the phone that I could just give Renata more, buy myself some peace and quiet. "That's not peace, Harold," she said. "That's just paying for her silence and calling it something nicer." "What if I'm only being stubborn?" I asked. "You're allowed to protect what you built," she said. "That's not stubbornness. That's just self-respect showing up a little late to the party." The divorce took just over 4 months to finalize. Renata received exactly what our pre-nuptial agreement entitled her to, no more, and gave up every claim against the company, the trust, and the scholarship fund in the process. At our final meeting downtown, she sat across the conference table from me, looking as tired as I felt. "Did you ever actually love me?" she asked, before we signed. I thought about the coffee she used to remember just how I liked it, the years I'd let myself believe we were building something real together. "I loved the woman I believed you were," I told her, and that was the truest answer I had left to give. Brielle reached out 2 months later. Her message said Renata had pressured her into things and that everything had spiraled further than she'd meant it to. There was no apology in it, only an explanation. I wrote back once, told her I genuinely cared for her as a daughter for years, and reminded her she was 28 years old and fully responsible for her own choices and her own words. My door wasn't permanently shut, I told her, but there would be no car, no checks, and no rewards for showing up, only when it was convenient. She never answered. Maybe someday she will, maybe she won't. Some doors you leave unlocked without ever expecting anyone to walk back through them. Desmond officially retired from fieldwork that spring, though retirement never suited a man like him. 3 weeks later, he was back on site training new hires on equipment safety, grumbling the whole time about how bored he was at home. At the first company meeting under the new ownership structure, Calvin stood up and announced the creation of the Desmond Carter Service Award, and Desmond leaned over to me, red-faced, and muttered, "This is humiliating." "That's exactly why I approved it," I told him. "You're a terrible friend," he said. "I've been told worse," I said, and this time we both laughed. The Mustang sold at a charity auction that June for more than either of us had guessed it would bring. The money helped launch a trade scholarship for veterans and young people who couldn't otherwise afford the training: welding, landscaping, small engine repair, real skills with real futures attached to them. We named it the Colleen Whitfield Trades Fund. That mattered to me more than almost anything else that came out of that whole difficult year, By May, Dr. Marsh confirmed the infection was fully resolved. I still tire faster than I used to. My left knee complains whenever it rains, and some mornings my hands shake a little too much to hold my coffee steady the first time I try. Surviving something like that doesn't make a man younger. It just makes him more careful about who gets to stand close enough to matter. I put Colleen's photographs back on the mantel where they belonged. I hired a cleaning service for the house, but I never once let anyone else near my own accounts again. Once a month now, I teach a small business class at the trade center. Desmond and I helped set up, mostly kids in their 20s who remind me, more than I expected, of the man I used to be before I let loneliness talk me into a bad decision. One afternoon that spring, Desmond and I stood at the edge of the training center's back lot, watching a group of apprentices plant a row of young maples along the new fence line. 3 days, Desmond said, shaking his head slowly. Turned into a pretty full year, didn't it? I looked at the thin new trees, upright and a little stubborn against the wind, the way something new usually has to be before it can stand on its own. It did, I agreed. Getting older doesn't mean you're obligated to accept disrespect just because you're afraid of ending up alone again. Sometimes the hardest boundary a man ever draws is the one he should have drawn years earlier. If you've ever had to protect your own dignity later than you wish you had, you're not the only one, and it's never too late to draw that line. And whatever you take from this story, remember the people who stayed when there was genuinely nothing in it for them to gain.